The steady hum of the plane's engines was a soothing background as I leaned back in my seat. A rare moment of peace had settled over me, the kind that comes with being thousands of feet in the air, untethered from the chaos below. The seatbelt sign blinked off, and passengers around me began their small rituals, pulling out books, adjusting blankets, or scrolling through their phones. I had just started reviewing the presentation slides for my early morning meeting when my phone buzzed. It wasn't unusual for someone to call during a flight, but the name on the screen made my stomach tighten. Mila, my wife of 12 years. Mila rarely called these days. Our conversations had grown sparse, perfunctory exchanges about schedules or bills. I almost ignored it, thinking it could wait until I landed, but something compelled me to swipe the green button. "Hello," I said, my voice low to avoid drawing attention. Her voice came through clear, calm, and unsettlingly cheerful. "Liam, I wanted to let you know I've made a decision." "A decision?" My pulse quickened. Her tone wasn't one of someone debating what to cook for dinner or where to vacation. It carried a weight that made me grip the armrest tighter. "Yes," she said smoothly. "I've decided to get married." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. "What are you talking about?" "We're married." She laughed softly, a sound devoid of warmth. "To someone else. I've been seeing Edward." "You've met him, my boss." The words felt like a physical blow, knocking the breath out of me. I could only manage a hoarse, "What?" "We've been serious for a while," she continued. "I've sold the house and moved my things out. You'll need to find somewhere else when you get back." The casual cruelty in her tone was staggering. This wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated annihilation. Yet, instead of exploding with rage or sinking into despair, a strange calm settled over me. "All right," I said evenly. "All right," she echoed, clearly thrown off by my lack of reaction. "That's all you have to say?" "Yes." "All right." My voice was steady, betraying none of the storm building inside me. Without waiting for a reply, I ended the call and stared out the window, the city lights below blurring into streaks. That single word, "all right," wasn't surrender. It was resolve. If Mila thought she had written the final chapter of my story, she was sorely mistaken. This was just the beginning. The plane touched down in the early hours of the morning, but I barely noticed the landing. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, replaying Mila's words over and over. The signs had been there, hadn't they? Late nights at the office, the guarded phone conversations, the sudden disinterest in anything remotely personal between us. Edward's name had peppered her conversations for months. "Edward thinks we should extend the project timeline. Edward said I've been indispensable to the team." I brushed it off as professional admiration, unaware it was a precursor to the knife she'd twist in my back. But selling the house? That was a step I hadn't anticipated. It was as if she wanted to erase every trace of the life we had built together. Yet, she underestimated one critical thing. I wasn't going to let her dictate the terms of my life. As soon as I stepped off the plane, I called my lawyer. "Julian, it's urgent. Mila says she sold the house. Is that even possible?" Julian's calm voice was like a bomb. "Not without your signature. The house is in your name, remember? Let me dig into it, but I'm confident she doesn't have a legal leg to stand on." I hung up, a faint smile tugging at my lips. Mila played her hand, thinking I'd be blindsided, but she hadn't accounted for the safeguards I put in place. She thought she was dismantling my life, but all she'd done was set the stage for me to take control. That night, sitting in a hotel room that felt both foreign and freeing, I let the memories come. There was a time when Mila had been the center of my world. I remember the first time I saw her at a company networking event. She was vibrant, charming everyone around her with a laugh that was infectious and a confidence that was magnetic. We bonded over our shared ambitions and dreams of building something meaningful. In the early years, we were a team, unstoppable and in sync. I threw myself into growing my logistics business while Mila climbed the corporate ladder. We celebrated each other's successes, cheering loudly from the sidelines. But somewhere along the way, the cracks began to form. It wasn't one catastrophic event, but a slow erosion. The late-night texts she guarded, the unexplained charges on the credit card, the emotional distance that widened with every passing year. I had ignored it for far too long, convincing myself that we were just going through a rough patch. But hindsight is a cruel teacher. Now I could see how Mila had been laying the groundwork for this betrayal for years, and I had been too blind, or too hopeful, to notice. The next morning, I met Julian at his office, where he spread a stack of documents across the desk. "The house is still legally yours," he confirmed. "She may have started the process, but no reputable buyer would finalize the sale without your consent." Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a simmering determination. "Then she doesn't know it's still mine," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Let's keep it that way for now." Julian raised an eyebrow. "What are you planning, Liam?" I gave him a faint smile. "I'm not planning anything. I'm just protecting what's mine." For the next few hours, Julian and I outlined every legal safeguard we could implement to ensure Mila couldn't touch a single asset, from freezing joint accounts to securing ownership of my business. Every move was calculated. This wasn't revenge. It was survival. By the time I returned to my hotel room, the weight of Mila's betrayal had begun to settle in, a way that felt both suffocating and liberating. The memories of what we had built together were tainted now, each one colored by the knowledge of her deception. But beneath the hurt was something else, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The next morning, I stared out of the window, the city skyline shimmering with the promise of a new day. My coffee had long gone cold, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Mila's words echoed in my mind. "You'll need to find somewhere else to stay." The sheer audacity of her statement would have been laughable if it weren't so cruel. I had worked tirelessly to build that home, brick by metaphorical brick. It wasn't just a house. It was a testament to the sacrifices I had made, the countless late nights and missed moments in pursuit of a better life for both of us. Now she was trying to erase it all, but she had underestimated me. That afternoon, I reached out to Carter, my financial advisor, to ensure every possible safeguard was in place. As I explained the situation, Carter's tone turned serious. "Liam, I've been monitoring your accounts, and there's something you should know," he said. "Mila made several large withdrawals over the past few weeks." My jaw tightened. How large are we talking?" "Significant," Carter said, his voice careful. "Enough that it could have been a serious problem if you hadn't already moved most of your assets into protected accounts." I closed my eyes, the betrayal deepening. Mila hadn't just been planning to leave me. She'd been trying to rob me blind on her way out. "Freeze everything connected to her immediately," I said, my voice steely. "Already done," Carter assured me. "She can't touch another dime." Hanging up, I felt a grim satisfaction. Mila's web of lies was beginning to unravel, and I wasn't going to stop until I was free of every strand. That evening, I allowed myself to reflect on the early days of our marriage. Mila had been my partner in every sense of the word, or so I thought. She was the one who encouraged me to take risks, to believe in myself when the odds were stacked against me. I had been a rock during her MBA program, working extra hours to cover our expenses so she could focus on her studies. I had believed we were building a future together, one where our sacrifices would eventually pay off. But now, I saw that future for what it was, a mirage. I poured myself a drink and stared at the ceiling, the weight of it all pressing down on me. But even in the quiet despair, a thought surfaced. This is a chance to start over. 2 days later, Julian called with news that made me sit up straighter. "You're going to find this interesting," he said. "Mila filed paperwork claiming the house sale was legitimate. Problem is, the buyer backed out when they realized she didn't have your consent." I couldn't help but laugh. "So she thought she could outsmart the system?" "Exactly," Julian said. "But here's the kicker. The paperwork she submitted has obvious signs of forgery." My amusement faded. "Forgery? That's serious." "It is," Julian said, "and it could be a key piece if this escalates." It was a sobering reminder of how far Mila was willing to go. But instead of anger, I felt a renewed sense of focus. If she wanted to fight, I was ready. When I returned home later that week, the house felt like a ghost of its former self. The furniture was rearranged, personal items were missing, as if Mila had tried to erase my presence. Yet the walls still held the echoes of our life together, a life she had abandoned without a second thought. I was unpacking when the front door swung open. Mila walked in, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Her confidence radiated, but I could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. I smiled, a calm, deliberate gesture. "This is my house, Mila. You don't get to decide who stays or goes." Her expression darkened. "The house is sold. You'll need to leave." I leaned against the kitchen counter, my arms crossed. "No, it's not. You can't sell what isn't yours." She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. "The house is in my name. Every attempt you've made to sell it is illegal." For the first time, she faltered. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I asked, pulling out the folder Julian had prepared. I tossed it onto the counter. "See for yourself." Mila's hands trembled as she flipped through the documents. Her usual composure was gone, replaced by a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You planned this," she accused, her voice shaking. "No," I said evenly. "I prepared for this." Her defiance flared again, but it was weaker now. "This doesn't change anything." "Oh, it changes everything," I replied. "You thought you could take everything from me, but now you're left with nothing." Her glare was sharp, but there was a flicker of something else. Fear. She stormed out without another word, leaving the door swinging in her wake. As the door slammed shut behind her, I felt a strange sense of relief. For years, I had been the one bending over backward to keep our marriage afloat, sacrificing my happiness for hers. But now the power dynamic had shifted. I wasn't just taking back what was mine. I was reclaiming my life. The next morning, the house felt eerily quiet. The faint scent of Mila's perfume still lingered in the air, but it was now a hollow reminder of what once was. As I sipped my coffee, staring out at the street, I couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of love, loss, and triumph. The confrontation had been inevitable, and though it left me drained, it had also clarified the stakes. Mila had made her choices, but she hadn't anticipated mine. My life was no longer hers to dismantle. I sat down at the dining table with a notepad, jotting down everything I needed to do next. My plan was simple: secure my assets, maintain control of the house, and ensure Mila's deceit didn't bleed into other areas of my life. This was no longer about emotions, it was strategy. Later that day, I called Carter for an update. "How are things looking on the financial front?" I asked. "Locked down," Carter said confidently. "The joint accounts are frozen, and her access to any shared funds has been revoked. If she tries anything, we'll know." "What about the withdrawals she made before I intervened?" I asked, my jaw tightening. "We're working on it," Carter replied. "It might take some time to recover those, but we have a solid case." Hanging up, I felt a wave of gratitude for the team I had in place. Julian and Carter weren't just professionals, they were lifelines in this storm. With their help, I knew I could weather whatever came next. The following week brought a string of provocations from Mila. It started with late-night calls from unknown numbers. When I answered, there was only silence on the other end. Then came the cryptic messages, ranging from "you won't get away with this" to outright threats like "you'll regret crossing me." At first, I ignored them, chalking them up to desperation. But when I found scratches on my car one morning, I realized Mila was escalating. I reported the vandalism to the police, documenting everything. It wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring she couldn't claim innocence when her actions caught up with her. A few days later, Lisa, a mutual friend, called me out of the blue. "Liam," she began hesitantly, "I don't want to get involved, but I think you should know. Emma's been talking." "Talking?" I repeated, leaning back in my chair. "What's she saying?" Lisa sighed. "She's telling people you froze her accounts out of spite and that you're trying to ruin her life. Some of them believe her, but most are skeptical. She's been acting off." I thanked Lisa for the information, my mind already racing. Mila's narrative might sway a few people, but the truth would outlast her lies. The more she flailed, the more obvious her desperation became. That evening, I found myself sifting through old photo albums I hadn't touched in years. There we were, Mila and I, smiling at the camera during happier times. Vacations, holidays, lazy Sundays in the backyard. They all seemed like someone else's life now. I lingered on one particular photo taken the day we bought the house. Mila was beaming, her hand resting on my shoulder as we stood in front of the freshly painted front door. "This is our sanctuary," she'd said that day, her voice filled with wonder. But the sanctuary had turned into a battlefield, and the woman in the photo was a stranger now. As the days passed, I began to reclaim the house in small but meaningful ways. I rearranged the furniture, removed the last of Mila's belongings, and repainted the walls in shades that felt like mine. Each brushstroke was an act of defiance, a statement that this space no longer belonged to her. One evening, as I was finishing up in the living room, the doorbell rang. Opening it, I found him standing there, her eyes red and swollen. She looked different, less composed, less assured. "We need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated but stepped aside, letting her in. Mila sank into the armchair, her movements slow and deliberate. "Liam," she began, her voice trembling, "I know I've made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can still make it work." I stared at her, incredulous. "Fix this? You lied, cheated, and tried to steal everything I've worked for. There's no coming back from that." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I saw the woman I used to love. But I couldn't let myself be swayed. "Mila, this isn't about forgiveness. It's about consequences." She stood abruptly, her composure slipping. "You think you're better than me? You're not. You've always been so focused on control, on winning. Well, congratulations, you've won." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. As the echo faded, I felt a strange sense of closure. Mila's words weren't a victory. They were an admission of defeat. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I reconnected with old friends, took up hobbies I had abandoned, and began exploring new opportunities for my business. Each step forward was a step away from the chaos Mila had brought into my life. The house, once a symbol of betrayal, became a sanctuary again. It was a place where I could breathe, reflect, and heal. The scars Mila left were still there, but they no longer defined me. Just when I thought Mila had moved on, she made one last desperate attempt to disrupt my life. One evening, I returned home to find her and Elliot, her supposed new love, waiting in the driveway. Elliot's smug expression and Mila's defiance told me this wasn't a social visit. "You think you can humiliate me and get away with it?" Mila spat as I approached. "This isn't about humiliation," I replied calmly. "It's about accountability." Elliot stepped forward, his posture aggressive. "You're going to regret this." I didn't flinch. "The only regret here is yours for thinking you could intimidate me." Before the situation could escalate, neighbors intervened, and the police were called. Mila's final gambit had failed, and this time, the consequences were swift. The police arrived swiftly, their flashing lights illuminating the driveway and casting long shadows against the house. Elliot's bravado evaporated the moment the officers stepped out of their vehicles, his aggressive stance shrinking into meek compliance. Mila, on the other hand, stood frozen, her expression flickering between defiance and panic. "Is there a problem here?" one officer asked, his sharp eyes scanning the scene. "Yes," I said calmly, keeping my distance from Mila and Elliot. "They were on my property, threatening me. This isn't the first time there's been an issue." Mila snapped out of her stupor. "He's lying," she shouted. "This is my house too." The officer raised an eyebrow, looking unimpressed. "Do you have proof of ownership, ma'am?" She hesitated, her confidence faltering as I produced the documents Julian had prepared. "The property is in my name," I explained. "She has no legal claim to it." The officer took a cursory glance at the papers, then turned back to Mila. "Ma'am, I suggest you leave the premises. If you return without permission, we'll have grounds for trespassing charges." Mila's face reddened with fury, but she didn't argue. Instead, she grabbed Elliot's arm and stormed off to their car. As they sped away, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The house, my sanctuary, was mine again. In the days following the confrontation, I received several calls from mutual acquaintances. Word had spread quickly about Mila's public meltdown, and her carefully constructed image was beginning to crumble. Lisa called again, her voice a mixture of concern and curiosity. Liam, what's going on with Mila? She's been telling people you're ruining her life, but honestly, it doesn't add up. I sighed, choosing my words carefully. Lisa, I've tried to stay quiet, but the truth is Mila's been making decisions that have nothing to do with me. I'm just protecting what's mine. Lisa didn't press further, but I could sense her doubts about Mila's story. It was only a matter of time before others started questioning her as well. A week later, I received an email that caught me off guard. It was from Elliot. His tone was far from the smug arrogance he displayed during our last encounter. Instead, it was apologetic, almost desperate. Liam, I want to apologize for what happened. I didn't realize the full extent of Mila's lies until recently. She manipulated me just like she did you. I'm done with her, but I thought you should know she's planning something. Be careful. I sat back, staring at the screen. Elliot's words didn't absolve him of his role in this mess, but they confirmed what I'd suspected all along. Mila wasn't done. With Elliot's warning fresh in my mind, I reached out to Julian and Carter to tighten every possible safeguard. Julian prepared restraining orders, ensuring Mila couldn't come near me or the house again, while Carter reviewed every financial detail, making sure there were no remaining vulnerabilities. Liam, you've done everything right, Carter said during our call. Whatever she's planning, she won't get far. Even with those assurances, I couldn't shake the sense of unease. Mila's desperation had reached dangerous levels, and I knew the final act of this saga was approaching. It happened on a rainy evening, fitting for the storm Mila brought into my life. I was in the living room when the power suddenly went out. Moments later, I heard a loud crash from the back of the house. Grabbing my phone, I called the police and stepped cautiously toward the noise. Through the dim light, I saw Mila standing in the kitchen, her hair wet from the rain, her eyes wild. "This isn't over, Liam," she shouted, her voice echoing in the darkened space. "You can't erase me like this." "Mila, leave," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. "The police are on their way." Her expression shifted from rage to something resembling despair. "You don't understand. I have nothing left." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of her choices. Before I could respond, the sound of sirens filled the night. The police arrived, taking Mila into custody for trespassing and property damage. As they led her away, I felt an unexpected pang of pity, but it wasn't enough to undo the damage she caused. In the days that followed, I focused on repairing the physical and emotional damage Mila had left behind. The house, though scarred, stood as a symbol of resilience. I replaced the broken window, fixed the power, and rearranged the furniture, making it truly my own. Lisa called to check in, her tone sympathetic. "Liam, you've been through so much. How are you holding up?" "Better than I thought I would," I admitted. "This has been a wake-up call, but it's also a chance to start over." Lisa hesitated, then added, "A lot of people are starting to see Mila for who she really is. You're not alone in this." Her words were a comfort, a reminder that I wasn't as isolated as Mila had tried to make me feel. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the routines that had once felt mundane. Each project completed, each milestone reached, felt like a step forward. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. The house, once a battleground, had become a sanctuary again. Friends visited more often, filling the space with laughter and warmth. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. The final piece of closure came when the court ruled in my favor, formally removing Mila from any claim to the house or my assets. As I left the courtroom, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The battle was over. Outside, I saw Mila standing alone, her head bowed. She looked up as I passed, her eyes filled with regret. "I'm sorry, Liam," she said softly. I paused, meeting her gaze. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Mila." With that, I walked away, leaving her, and the past, behind. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding, not just my life, but my sense of self. I traveled, reconnected with old friends, and even started dating again. Each day felt like a step toward a brighter future. The house, once a source of pain, was now a place of joy. It wasn't just a structure. It was a testament to my resilience. One evening, as I stood on the balcony watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, I reflected on everything I'd endured. Mila's betrayal had been a devastating blow, but it had also been a catalyst. It forced me to confront the truth, to let go of what no longer served me, and to reclaim my life. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The storm had passed, and I was still standing, stronger than ever. This wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of a story I would write on my terms.